The Marshal and the Merchant by Simon Cross. The heavy wagon wheels creaked as they rolled over the uneven trail, each jolt sending vibrations through the wooden frame that Sarah Matthews could feel in her bones. 3 weeks on the road from Denver had worn her patience thin, but the endless blue Montana sky above somehow kept her spirits aloft. "Not much farther now, Miss Matthews," called the driver, his leathery face creasing into a smile beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Silverdale should be just beyond that ridge." Sarah nodded, adjusting her simple blue bonnet against the bright afternoon sun. At 26 she was considered well past marriageable age back east, but here in the Western Territories of 1878, she represented something rare, a woman with both means and independence. The small leather satchel tucked beside her contained the deed to the mercantile she had purchased through correspondence, sight unseen. "I appreciate your guidance, Mr. Hollister," she replied, smoothing the wrinkles from her traveling dress, "though I confess I'm eager to stand on solid ground again." The driver chuckled. "Territory ain't for the faint of spirit, miss. Most folks who come out this way either have nothing to lose or something to hide." Sarah's gaze drifted to the rolling landscape. "And which am I wonder?" "Neither, if I had to guess," Hollister said. "You strike me as someone running toward something, not away." The wagon crested the final hill, revealing Silverdale sprawled across a gentle valley. It was larger than Sarah had anticipated, a proper street with wooden sidewalks, a church steeple rising above the other buildings, and what appeared to be at least 24 structures comprising the main thoroughfare. "There she is," Hollister announced. "Not Denver, but growing every month with the cattle trade and the railroad spur line." Sarah's fingers tightened around the handle of her parasol. The life she had carefully planned waited below. A business of her own, freedom from Boston society's suffocating constraints, and the memory of a broken engagement that had left her determined never to depend on a man's constancy again. The wagon rolled down the hill, and Sarah steeled herself for whatever awaited. She had sold every possession, cut ties with disapproving family, and traveled halfway across a continent. There could be no turning back. Cole Harrington watched the approaching wagon with mild interest as he leaned against the post outside the marshal's office. New arrivals always meant either trouble or opportunity, sometimes both. As the town's marshal for the past 3 years, he developed a keen sense for reading people, and the woman perched primly on the wagon seat struck him as distinctly out of place. "Fenton," he called over his shoulder to his deputy, "looks like that mercantile owner's finally arrived." Deputy Fenton appeared in the doorway, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. "Eastern lady? Ain't she? Wonder how long before she sells up and heads back where things make sense." Cole pushed his hat back slightly. "Give her a chance at least. Town needs that mercantile running proper." 2 months, Fenton wagered. "I give her 2 months before the reality of frontier life sends her packin'." "That's unkind," Cole remarked, though not without a hint of amusement. "I'll say 6 months minimum." The wagon pulled to a stop outside the Silverdale Hotel, and Cole straightened. As town marshal, welcoming new business owners fell under his unofficial duties. He crossed the dusty street, noting how the woman's posture remained perfectly straight, despite what must have been an exhausting journey. "Welcome to Silverdale, ma'am," he said, removing his hat as the driver helped her down. "Marshal Cole Harrington at your service." Sarah looked up at the tall man before her. His eyes were a surprising shade of blue beneath dark brows, his jaw strong but not severe. The badge pinned to his vest caught the afternoon light. "Miss Sarah Matthews," she replied with a slight nod. "I understand you've been overseeing my property until my arrival." "Just keeping trespassers out," Cole clarified. "Previous owner left rather abruptly after some gambling debts caught up to him. Place needs work." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Cole noticed her knuckles whitening around the handle of her traveling bag. "I see. The correspondence gave no indication the property was in disrepair." "Welcome to the West, Miss Matthews," Cole said with a slight smile. "Nothing here is quite what it appears in writing." "Indeed," she replied coolly. "Well, I should like to see my establishment immediately, if you wouldn't mind escorting me, Marshal." Cole hesitated. "Might be better to get settled at the hotel first. The mercantile isn't habitable yet." "I didn't travel 2,000 miles to delay seeing my investment another moment," she countered. "Please, lead the way." Something in her tone, determination mixed with vulnerability, made Cole reconsider. "As you wish. Your luggage can go to the hotel meanwhile." They walked side by side down the wooden sidewalk, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. Sarah kept her gaze forward, though Cole noticed how she took in details with quick, appraising looks. "The town's growing," he explained. "Railway spur brought new opportunities. You've got the cattle operations to the north, miners passing through from the mountains, and homesteaders trying their luck on the surrounding land. And they all need supplies," Sarah noted. "Exactly. Previous mercantile owner had the right idea, wrong execution. Too much gambling, too little inventory management." They stopped before a two-story wooden building with a wide storefront. The windows were grimy, and the sign above hung crooked, but the structure itself appeared sound. Cole produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, which creaked loudly as it swung inward. Sarah stepped inside, and her shoulders fell slightly. The interior was a shambles, empty shelves toppled, dust coating every surface, a broken counter, and scattered debris suggesting hasty departure. "Oh," she said quietly, the single syllable weighted with dismay. Cole watched her carefully. "Like I said, needs work." Sarah removed her gloves slowly, surveying the space. Then, to Cole's surprise, she set her jaw and nodded. "Yes, it certainly does. Where would one find a broom in this town, Marshal Harrington?" "You're not thinking of starting now? You've been traveling for weeks." "Daylight remains," she replied simply, "and I don't believe in postponing necessary tasks." Cole found himself smiling. "There's a hardware store 3 doors down. I'll have Fenton bring you some basic supplies." Sarah walked to the center of the room, turning slowly as she assessed the space. "I'll reimburse any expenses, of course." "Consider it a welcome gift from the town," Cole said. "We've been without proper provisions for months. Folk are eager to see this place operational again." Their eyes met briefly, mutual assessment passing between them. Cole saw determination in her gaze, while Sarah noted something unexpectedly gentle in the lawman's expression. "Well then," she said, breaking the moment as she tied her bonnet strings more securely, "I shouldn't disappoint them." A week passed in a flurry of activity. Sarah had hired 2 local boys to help with the heavy cleaning and repairs, discovering that her budget would stretch further than anticipated in Silverdale. The community proved surprisingly supportive, women bringing meals, men offering advice on repairs, and even the banker extending credit terms more generous than she had dared hope. The upper floor of the mercantile contained 3 rooms, a small kitchen, a modest parlor, and a bedroom, which she had quickly made habitable. Living above her business would save money and provide security, practical considerations that outweighed any social impropriety. On the 8th morning, Sarah opened the newly repaired front door to find Marshal Harrington on the sidewalk, hat in hand. "Good morning, Miss Matthews," he said, his deep voice carrying a note of approval as he surveyed the transformed storefront. "The place is looking considerably improved." "Marshal," she acknowledged with a small smile. "Yes, it's coming along, though I'm still awaiting inventory from Denver." "Actually, that's why I'm here," he replied. "Stage brought word that your shipment arrives today on the afternoon train. Thought you might need help transporting it all." Sarah blinked in surprise. "That's earlier than expected. I haven't finished preparing the shelving." "Town's eager to have a proper store again," Cole explained. "Railroad agent likely prioritized your freight." "How fortuitous," Sarah murmured, mentally recalculating her timeline. "Though I'm not certain how I'll manage moving everything." "I've arranged for Peterson's wagon and a couple of volunteers," Cole said. Sarah studied him, trying to discern his motivation. "That's very considerate, Marshal. May I ask why you've taken such an interest in my establishment?" Cole's expression shifted slightly, something guarded moving behind his eyes. "A functioning mercantile means a more stable town. Stability makes my job easier." "I see," Sarah replied, though she sensed there was more he wasn't sharing. "Well, I appreciate the assistance." 2 o'clock at the station, then, he said, replacing his hat. As he turned to leave, he added, "By the way, Mrs. Sullivan at the cafe mentioned you haven't taken a proper meal there yet. Food's surprisingly good for frontier cooking." Sarah felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "I've been rather occupied." "All work makes for a dull existence, Miss Matthews," he said with a slight smile. "Even out here." She watched him walk away, his tall figure moving with quiet confidence down the street. There was something about Marshal Harrington that unsettled her carefully maintained composure, a directness in his manner that brushed aside pretense, so unlike the gentleman of Boston society. Sarah returned to her work, organizing the newly cleaned shelves according to her meticulously planned inventory system. By midday, her back was sore from the effort, and her stomach reminded her that coffee and dry biscuits made for poor sustenance. Perhaps the Marshal had a point about Mrs. Sullivan's cafe. The establishment was busy when Sarah entered, but the robust woman behind the counter immediately waved her forward. "Well now, if it ain't our new shopkeeper finally coming up for air," Mrs. Sullivan declared loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Was beginning to think you planned to survive on determination alone." Sarah felt eyes turned toward her but maintained her composure. "Good afternoon. I found myself with an appetite after all this morning's work." "Sit yourself down," Mrs. Sullivan instructed, pointing to a small table in the corner. "I'll bring you something worth the wait." The meal that arrived exceeded Sarah's expectations: tender roast beef, fresh bread, and vegetables that somehow retained their flavor despite the challenges of frontier food storage. She was so absorbed in her first proper meal in days that she didn't notice Marshal Harrington until he pulled out the chair opposite her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, though he was already seated. Sarah dabbed her lips with a napkin. "It seems you already have, Marshal." "Cole," he corrected. "Town this size, titles get cumbersome." "Very well, Cole," she conceded. "Though I presume you'll continue addressing me as Miss Matthews." A slight smile touched his lips. "Western propriety has its limits, but yes, until you suggest otherwise." Mrs. Sullivan appeared with a plate for Cole without being summoned, giving Sarah a conspiratorial wink before departing that made her flush slightly. "I understand you came from Boston," Cole said, cutting into his meal. "Long way to travel alone." "I wasn't aware my personal history was common knowledge," Sarah replied, slightly defensive. "Small towns," Cole explained with a shrug. "Information travels faster than stagecoaches. Besides, your accent gives you away." Sarah straightened. "I wasn't aware I had an accent." "Everyone has an accent to someone," he replied. "Out here, yours speaks of education and Eastern upbringing." "And I suppose yours speaks of what exactly?" she challenged. Cole considered this as he chewed. "Virginia originally, though I've been out west long enough that most folks can't place it anymore." Sarah's curiosity got the better of her restraint. What brings a Virginian to Montana territory as a lawman? Something flickered across Cole's face. A shadow quickly suppressed. "War has a way of uprooting men," he said simply. "After Appomattox, home didn't feel much like home anymore." The war between the states had ended 13 years prior, yet Sarah understood immediately that Cole Harrington carried its legacy still. Her own father, a Boston merchant who had supplied Union forces, had spoken little of those dark years. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That was presumptuous of me." Cole shook his head. "Just history now. Like whatever brought you 2,000 miles from civilization to open a shop in a town barely on the map." Their eyes met, mutual recognition passing between them. Both had stories they preferred to keep private. "Sometimes new beginnings require distance," Sarah offered, surprising herself with the admission. Cole nodded slowly. "On that, Miss Matthews, we are in complete agreement." By late September, Silverdale Mercantile had transformed into a thriving enterprise. Sarah's meticulous inventory system and fair pricing had won over the townsfolk, while her willingness to order specialty items from catalogs earned loyalty from the surrounding ranches and homesteads. The changing season brought crisp mornings and cottonwood leaves turning yellow along the creek. It also brought increasing visits from Marshal Harrington, sometimes on official business, checking on security after a minor theft at the saloon, but often with thin pretexts that fooled neither of them. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits despite her better judgment. Cole's dry humor and straightforward manner had begun to erode the carefully constructed walls she had built after Richard's betrayal in Boston. On this particular evening, she was reviewing her accounts when a knock came at the side door. Cole's knock, she realized, already recognizing its rhythm. "It's unlocked," she called, setting aside her ledger. Cole entered, removing his hat as always. Tonight, he carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Evening, Miss Matthews," he greeted her. "Not interrupting your calculations, I hope?" Sarah smiled despite herself. "Actually you are, but I welcome the distraction. The numbers have started swimming before my eyes." Successful business brings its own challenges, he observed, setting the package on the table. Brought something that might interest you? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Another delivery from the station? Not exactly. Cole unwrapped the package to reveal a book. Train passenger left this behind last week. Station master knows I enjoy reading and passed it along, but it struck me as something more to your taste. Sarah accepted the volume, a new novel she had heard mentioned in her correspondence with a former schoolmate. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her unexpectedly. That's very kind, she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. I haven't had much time for reading since arriving. All that building and inventory management, Cole said with a smile. Seems you've proven Fenton wrong. Fenton? My deputy wagered you wouldn't last 2 months. Cole's eyes squinted at the corners. I said 6, minimum. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. And now? Now I'm thinking you might outlast us all, he replied, his tone shifting to something more serious. You've built something impressive here, Sarah. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung between them. Thank you, she said quietly, though I suspect the town's generosity played no small part. Cole shook his head. Don't minimize your accomplishment. Plenty have tried and failed at what you've managed in 3 months. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift in the atmosphere between them. Cole took a step closer, close enough that she could detect the scent of soap and leather that seemed uniquely his. Sarah, The moment shattered as shouts erupted from the street, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Cole's expression changed instantly, the lawman replacing the man. Stay inside, he instructed sharply, already moving toward the door. Sarah followed him to the threshold, watching as he strode toward the commotion near the saloon. 2 men were squared off in the street, one brandishing a knife while onlookers formed a loose circle around them. Through the open door, she heard Cole's authoritative command. That's enough. Put it down, Jenkins. The man with the knife, Jenkins, turned toward Cole with a snarl. This ain't your business, Marshal. Dawson here owes me, and I aim to collect? Put the knife down, Cole repeated, his hand resting casually near his holster. Whatever he owes, it ain't worth hanging for. The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Sarah held her breath, suddenly aware of how quickly violence could erupt in this place she had begun to consider home. Jenkins wavered, the knife blade catching the light from the saloon windows. Then, with a muttered curse, he lowered his arm. Fine, he spat, but he still owes me. And you can settle it without steel, Cole said evenly. Now both of you clear the street before I decide the jail cells need occupants tonight. The crowd began to disperse as Cole confiscated the knife. Sarah watched him work, efficient, calm, authoritative without unnecessary force. This was a side of him she had glimpsed but never fully witnessed, and it reminded her sharply of the world she had entered. Later, when Cole returned to her door, his expression was apologetic. Seems our conversation was interrupted, he said. Sarah nodded, suddenly unsure of herself. Is everything resolved? For tonight, Cole replied. Cattle prices are down, which means tempers run high. Men who can't pay their debts get desperate. The reality of frontier life, its precariousness, settled around Sarah's shoulders like a heavy shawl. Her mercantile book showed similar patterns, accounts that had once been settled promptly now carried balances. I should let you rest, Cole said, sensing her shift in mood. But I hoped, that is, the town's organizing a harvest dance next Saturday at the church hall. Would you consider attending, with me? The invitation hung between them, a bridge across the careful distance they had maintained. Sarah thought of Boston, of Richard's smiling betrayal, of her vow never to risk her independence again. Yet Cole Harrington was nothing like Richard Wellington. Where Richard had been smooth words and hidden intentions, Cole was forthright to a fault. Where Richard had seen her inheritance as his opportunity, Cole had only ever offered assistance without expectation. I would like that, she heard herself say. Cole's smile transformed his face, softening the lines etched by sun and responsibility. I'll call for you at 7, then. After he left, Sarah returned to her account books, but the numbers refused to hold her attention. Outside, Silverdale settled into evening quiet, so different from Boston's constant hum of activity. She had come west seeking independence, determined to need no one. Yet somehow, in this remote place she had found not just self-reliance but also community, and possibly something more precious still. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, Sarah found herself smiling as she closed her ledger for the night, the harvest dance already occupying her thoughts. The church hall had been transformed with corn stalks, lanterns, and ribbons strung from the rafters. A small band of local musicians filled the space with lively tunes as couples circled the floor in patterns both formal and improvised. Sarah smoothed the skirt of her blue silk dress, one of the few fine garments she had brought from Boston. She had spent the afternoon with unexpected nervousness, arranging her hair and debating which modest jewelry would be appropriate for a frontier town dance. Cole had arrived precisely at 7, his usual attire replaced by a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His eyes had widened appreciatively at the sight of her, and Sarah had felt a fluttering sensation that she hadn't experienced in years. Now, as they moved together in a waltz, his hand warm and steady at her waist, Sarah realized how much her perspective had shifted in 3 months. The Boston society that had once defined her world now seemed remote and artificial compared to the honest directness of life in Silverdale. "You dance well for a lawman," she remarked, looking up at him. Cole's lips quirked. "Virginia upbringing. My mother insisted all her sons learn properly, though I doubt she envisioned Montana Territory as the setting." "And what would she think of your current partner?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Cole's eyes held hers steadily. "She would approve of a woman with courage and determination, as do I." The music ended, and couples around them applauded the musicians. Cole led Sarah toward the refreshment table, his hand lightly resting at the small of her back in a gesture both protective and respectful. Mrs. Sullivan, serving punch with suspicious enthusiasm, winked broadly at Sarah. "My, don't you two make a handsome pair. Marshal, you clean up proper when you try." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan," Cole replied with good-natured tolerance. "Your punch smells suspiciously spirited tonight." "Special recipe for special occasions?" the woman replied with a grin. "Does the heart good to see the town celebrating after the hard summer." Sarah accepted a cup, listening as townspeople approached Cole with greetings and questions. She observed how they respected him, not from fear but from genuine regard. This was a man who had earned his place in the community through action rather than inheritance or connection. "Miss Matthews, such a lovely dress," exclaimed Miss Porter, the minister's wife. "I was just telling Reverend Porter how fortunate we are that you decided to settle among us. The mercantile hasn't been so well managed in years." "You're very kind," Sarah replied, "though I'm still learning the particular needs of Silverdale." "Nonsense. You've taken to frontier life as though born to it," Mrs. Porter insisted. "And certain parties have certainly taken notice." She glanced meaningfully toward Cole, who was engaged in conversation with several ranchers. Sarah felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "Marshal Harrington has been very helpful with the establishment of my business." Mrs. Porter's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by the formal response. "Indeed. Well, I should circulate. Do enjoy the evening, my dear." As the night progressed, Sarah danced with several townsmen, the banker, the blacksmith, even young Deputy Fenton, who stepped on her toes twice while blushing furiously. But her awareness remained fixed on Cole, even when they were separated by the width of the hall. During a break in the music, Cole guided her outside where the crisp evening air provided relief from the crowded hall. Stars scattered across the vast Montana sky in numbers that still astonished Sarah after years in Boston's gaslit streets. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Cole said softly, following her gaze upward. "No matter how long I live out here, that sky never becomes ordinary." "It makes one feel rather small," Sarah admitted. "Or part of something larger," Cole suggested. "Depends on your perspective." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the music from inside creating a distant backdrop to the night sounds of the prairie. "Sarah," Cole began, his voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before, "I've been meaning to speak with you about something." She turned toward him, suddenly conscious of how alone they were in the starlight. "Yes?" "When you first arrived, I thought, like many others, that you were out of place here, that the territory would prove too harsh, too demanding." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've never been so glad to be wrong." Sarah's pulse quickened. "The territory has its challenges, certainly, but also unexpected rewards." "Indeed it does," Cole agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "I find myself thinking of you at the oddest moments, wondering what you might think of a sunset, or how you'd handle a difficult customer, or whether you're eating proper meals when you work late." The admission, so simply stated, touched something deep within Sarah. In Boston, men had courted her with flowery compliments and calculated flattery. Cole's straightforward confession of everyday concern felt more genuine than all those polished phrases. "I've thought of you as well," she confessed. "More than is entirely sensible." Cole took a step closer. "I don't have much to offer beyond myself, Sarah. A lawman's life isn't easy or guaranteed, but if you'd consider." The hall door burst open, light spilling onto the porch as Deputy Fenton appeared, his young face tense with urgency. "Marshal, fire at the livery stable." Cole's expression shifted instantly. "Alert the bucket brigade," he instructed, then turned to Sarah. "I have to go." "Of course," she replied, already gathering her skirts. "I'll help organize the women to assist." In the organized chaos that followed, Sarah found herself working alongside the town's women to provide water, bandages, and coordination as the men fought to contain the blaze. The livery stable's dry hay had ignited quickly, but the community's swift response prevented spread to adjacent buildings. By dawn, the danger had passed, leaving a charred skeleton where the stable had stood and exhausted, soot-covered townspeople surveying the damage. Miraculously, all the horses had been saved, though 2 men suffered burns requiring the doctor's attention. Sarah found Cole directing the final containment efforts, his fine suit ruined, his face blackened with smoke. "Any word on how it started?" she asked, offering him a dipper of water. Cole drank gratefully before answering. "Lantern knocked over during a card game, from what we can piece together. Stable hand and a couple of cowboys thought they'd have a private poker night." Sarah shook her head. "Thank goodness no lives were lost." "Indeed," Cole agreed, his voice hoarse from smoke, "and the town responded admirably, including you." She looked up at him, this man who had set aside his own desires to protect others without hesitation. In that moment, the last of her reservations fell away like autumn leaves in a strong wind. "You were saying something earlier," she prompted softly, before we were interrupted. Despite exhaustion, Cole's eyes brightened with recognition. He glanced around at the bustling activity, then gently took her elbow and guided her a few steps away from the main crowd. "Not exactly how I planned this," he said ruefully, gesturing to his disheveled state. "I find I prefer honesty to perfection," Sarah replied. Cole's expression grew serious. "Then honestly, Sarah Matthews, I find myself in love with you. Your courage, your determination, your kindness beneath that proper Boston reserve. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but life out here teaches a man not to waste time when something precious appears." Sarah felt tears well in her eyes, not from sadness but from a wellspring of emotion she had kept carefully contained since leaving Boston. "When I came west," she said slowly, "I was determined to need no one. To prove, perhaps mostly to myself, that I could build a life entirely of my own making." Cole nodded, something guarded entering his expression. "And you've done exactly that. Your independence is part of what I admire." "Yes," Sarah agreed, reaching for his hand. "But I've discovered something I didn't expect. Independence doesn't have to mean isolation. Strength can be found in connection as well as in self-reliance." Hope dawned in Cole's eyes. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying," Sarah interrupted gently, "that I've fallen in love with you too, Cole Harrington. With your integrity, your quiet strength, and yes, even your infuriating habit of being right about things." The smile that transformed Cole's exhausted face was like sunrise breaking across the mountains. Without regard for propriety or the distant onlookers, he gathered Sarah into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and possibility. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you, a marshal's wife faces certain challenges." "As does a mercantile owner's husband," Sarah countered with a smile. "I have no intention of relinquishing my business." Cole laughed, the sound rich with joy. "I would expect nothing less from the woman who conquered Silverdale in 3 months." Around them, the town began to stir fully into morning activity. The damage would be repaired, the stable rebuilt. Silverdale had weathered worse, and would continue to grow and thrive. And so too, Sarah realized, would this unexpected love, cultivated in the fertile soil of mutual respect and shared purpose. She had journeyed west seeking independence and found instead a different kind of freedom. The liberty to choose connection without sacrifice, strength through partnership rather than isolation. As the sun rose fully over the eastern ridges, bathing the settlement in morning light, Sarah Matthews stood beside Cole Harrington, their fingers intertwined, facing whatever future might come, together.